I want to talk today, and you probably all know this teaching. It's the eight. I want to talk about the Eightfold Path, and it's a lot for a Dharma talk, but sometimes I feel it's helpful to kind of just refresh what the Eightfold Path is. And the reason I want to talk about it is because a few weeks ago, I do weekly classes, and I was talking about. And I know I taught here last week, and I don't remember exactly what I was talking about, but I talked a few weeks ago in my class about groundlessness and how right now there's a lot of groundlessness. That a real awareness of impermanence and shifting sands, so to speak, under us, and how it's just moving. And then last week I was talking about in my class the complexity of these moments that we're living with, and what a challenge they present. So there's this groundlessness, and there's this complexity of the human condition. It's not anything special, it's the human condition, but sometimes it's more challenging than others. And in both cases, when I was reflecting on those two experiences, I offered, and I came to, and as I was thinking about it, the Eightfold Path as a ground on which to land. It's not, it's a foundation that these teachings offer us. And that's what it's been for me. I think of the Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths, but as the teachings, as if you've seen trapeze artists in circuses, and they have a net so that if anything happens, hopefully most of the time they have a net, if anything happens, they can just land. And that's how I see the Eightfold Path. When stuff's like, whoa, what's going on? This practice, these teachings offer me a place of groundedness inside of the awareness that there's nothing permanent. And it's, it's an important teaching. And I had a yoga teacher years ago, and when she used to um, uh, show us an asana, a move or a position for the first time, she would call it, okay, she'd say, all right, I'm going to do speedy teacher version, just so we got a sense of what it was. And I feel like that's what I'm going to do with the Eightfold Path, a speedy teacher version. It's just kind of like go through, but just really a look at these qualities and how they can support us as we move through the world, as we move through these days. The Buddha talked about it as the path to freedom. It's the path to liberation, nibbana. Nibbana is the cessation of clinging. It's the cessation of any kind of attachment. And so there's this freedom that comes from that. And this path, well, in the Four Noble Truths, the first noble truth is that there is dukkha, there is suffering, there is loss, there is grief, there's birth, there's death, there's all these things, this awareness of impermanence, the awareness of the unsatisfactoriness of life. And the second noble truth is that the cause of much of our suffering, of this extra level of discomfort we feel, is our attachment, is our craving for things to be good all the time, our wanting pleasant, and our wanting what we want when we want it, having these ideas of how things should be, and our inability to let that go. This should happen, and I should have this, and you should do that. And when those things don't happen, or when things we don't want to happen, we're just like bowled over. And so that clinging to the shoulds and the have tos and the oughtas really is painful, is really a lot of discontent. And so the third noble truth says there's a way out, and that way out is the fourth noble truth, which is the Eightfold Path. So I want to talk about that. And also last week I saw a quote from a woman, Loretta Ross, and she said, and I think this is really important, she said, we are not defined by what we're against, but we are defined by what we are for. And what are we for is this path to liberation, these teachings that teach us how to live in a way that offers freedom for us and for all beings. It offers us a way to be in the world with each other in harmony. And so, what's not to like? That's my question. That's my rhetorical question. What's not to like? Um, so briefly, the Eightfold Path is divided into three divisions, so to speak. There's wisdom, panya, there's ethical behavior, sila, and then there's concentration or collectedness of mind, samadhi. And it's not that we start at one and work our way through and then we're done and la, la, la. It's this continually moving through, and the different factors support each other. It's like so many of the teachings in Buddhism, they all point to each other and support each other. And we start where we are, and I'll touch more on this towards the end, but wherever we are, that's where that's how we turn towards the teachings. It's like, oh, this is what's bothering me right now. This might be where I want to focus my energy, or focus what I'm working on. And so the first factor is wise view, and you'll often hear it called right view, or wise and right. People translate the word two different ways, and I like wise because there is wrong view, but I like using wisdom. So wise versus unwise, skillful versus unskillful. So wise view is seeing the nature of existence, seeing, that things are impermanent, recognizing that things are impermanent, recognizing that by their nature of being impermanent, there's an unsatisfactoriness to them. If we hitch our wagon to something that's impermanent, hoping for living happily ever after, we're going to be disappointed. We have, and I don't know if it's cultural or the way the mind is wired, but we all, and I know I do, we have this sense of, when I get to this place, when I achieve X, Y, or Z, then I will be happy. Then I will have arrived. And the problem is, we get there and things shift and change, and it's not what we thought it was. Or then we see something else that's shiny and we go for that. Well, this wasn't quite it. I want that. And that's the recognition of anatta, this self that's not permanent or fixed, that we're constantly moving and impacted by causes and conditions and choices we make and directions we take and the people around us and the world we live in. So there's this constant shifting, and that there is dissatisfaction, there's loss. So to recognize the reality of the human condition, and to have that as, again, a grounding, a foundation. And there's a fabulous book by Bhikkhu Bodhi, who's a fabulous teacher, called The Noble Eightfold Path. It's like really little, but it's really wonderful. And if you don't have it, I highly recommend it. And he talks about right view. He says it's the forerunner of the entire path, the guide for all the other factors. It enables us to understand our starting point, our destination, and the successive landmarks to pass as practice advances. To attempt to engage in the practice without a foundation of right view is to risk getting lost in the futility of undirected movement. So we have this recognition when things are going haywire, we go, oh, that's right, dukkha. It's one of the characteristics of existence. There is this discomfort. Things are gonna change. The 5 remembrances fit into this. We're all of the nature to grow old, to get sick, to die. All we have will be lost to us, will be taken from us. All we have are our actions. All we have are this moment. Coming back to that again and again. So having that clarity and the willingness to greet this discomfort And the opposite of wise view is when we're stuck in greed, we're stuck in craving, or we're stuck in hatred and aversion, or we're just lost in delusion, just like so much dust in our eyes. So to have that wise view, and even like I talk about, or I've heard it said many times, we start with the gross. I mean, when I came to this practice, it was like, these are big things, and just chipping away at little awarenesses of how I'm stuck in greed, or stuck in aversion, or stuck in delusion, and then bringing these principles to bear to begin to let go of some of that stuff. So this stuff, I'm not dead, I'm not enlightened, so I'm still working through all this. But these teachings become more and more subtle the more we practice them, the more we work with them, the more we recognize them in our own lives. And the next factor, wise intention, one of my favorites, because it's kind of gives us that direction. It's inclining the mind to move in a particular way. It's like steering the ship. We have to have a course laid out. And I wish I could remember, Kevin Griffin, a wonderful teacher, talks about, I can't remember his exact quote, but it's like, when we're in this place of being confused or indecisive or at a crossroads and not knowing which particular direction to take, we go, oh, wait, what's the intention? Is this taking me towards my intention or away from my intention? And inside of wise intention, right intention, are there's three pieces. And there's all these lists and inside lists, and because I believe it's because this was an oral tradition for hundreds of years after the Buddha died, and it's a lot easier to remember lists and things if you're memorizing and teaching orally. So I think that's why we've got all this inside of this. There's this, but the first piece of wise intention is renunciation, which is not just to let go of stuff to be a good person, but to see that when we do cling, when we cling to an idea of what something is supposed to be, when we cling to a relationship long past its time, when we cling to something, whatever it is, whatever our own personal struggle is with shoulds and have tos and if only, when we see the suffering that causes us and perhaps other people, we become willing to let it go. We become willing to renounce it. These are habits, fixed views, old stories, whatever it is. This idea, I was talking to someone the other day, and he was talking about how fixed he is on how he wants people to see him, the story of him. And when things come up or he has to do things that break from that story, how painful it is. So the question is, can you let go of the story? Can I let go of the way I want people to see me? That, and I struggled for years with perfectionism. So the need for people to see me as always getting it right or doing a great job, getting a pat on the head was like, oh my God, I've made it, but perfectionism is never works out because we're imperfect, but to be willing to let go of that. And it's like, okay, I'm stuck on that. My intention is to let that go. Okay, I'm going to walk in the direction little by little by little. It's a guiding principle. And then the other two pieces of wise intention are to greet the world with goodwill, metta, which is an antidote to ill will, which is an antidote to aversion. We greet the world with goodwill and compassion, which is also an antidote to ill will. It's this cultivation of the heart, It's I think Bhikkhu Bodhi said it's the strong wish of the mind to alleviate suffering. I watched this little I think I showed it I taught on Tuesday, I think that's what it was, and I showed this little video from Sharon Salzberg about a little animated video, and she was talking about compassion. It was cute, and her end reflection was that compassion is the natural result of paying attention. When we pay attention to the world around us, when we pay attention to each other, there's this natural connection that arises. And insight practice, the Buddha says the natural arising is loving kindness and compassion. We sit with a heart imbued with these things. So to recognize our impulses that are perhaps not kind or not compassionate, perhaps have a flavor of ill will, or I'm glad you got yours, kind of thing, and to shift into a place of softening. So we have some clarity, some wisdom, and we have what Jack Kornfield calls a wise heart. So that's the groundwork, seeing things for what they are and moving in this direction that lets go of suffering, causing suffering for ourselves and for others. And it leads right into the next piece, which is the ethical behavior piece, sila, which is incredibly important. It's how we live in harmony with others. It's how we live in harmony with others. And I was on a retreat many years ago, and Ruth King was one of the teachers, and she said her intention is to live in a way that makes it safe for others to be around her. And it was just like, it like landed. I was like, I found that really powerful. And this wise action, wise speech, wise livelihood, right? This ethical behavior piece of the Eightfold Path, which is where the precepts come from, helps us to live our daily lives with this, with integrity, without causing harm. And the first one is wise speech. And I want to say wise communication, because we do more than just speak to each other these days. We communicate in myriad ways. So to be wise in how we speak. And in fact, Bhikkhu Bodhi talks about that. He says, speech can break lives, create enemies, and start wars, or it can give wisdom, heal divisions, and create peace. This has always been so, yet in the modern age, the positive and negative potentials of speech have been vastly multiplied by the tremendous increase in the means, speed, and range of communications. And now we get to contend with AI, which is a whole other crazy world of perhaps, and perhaps one of the things of the Buddha talked about in wise speech, wise communication. Is it true? It's like, oh, there's a whole bunch of stuff that isn't true these days. So much misinformation, so much harm being caused. So to avoid lies, avoid slander, avoid harsh speech, idle chatter, which just leads to, gossip and perhaps the defilements, greed and hatred. He says that when we speak, we have to ask ourselves, is it true? Am I saying it gently? And as again, with communication, is it the right time? Is this helpful? And what's my intention for this communication? I always like to think I add in, is it necessary, helpful, necessary? Because so often a lot of the things I want to say are not necessary. And when I can refrain, let go of that, I really save myself from a lot of suffering. So it's wise communication and deep listening. And wise speech has been one of the things I've worked with more than anything else, because I grew up in New York City and sarcasm was my way of communicating with others. And I was good at it and I was funny. And then I moved to California and people did not communicate the same way I communicated. And I had people tell me I made them cry. And I could cause with my razor sharp wit, sarcasm, which can be very, very cutting. And I felt it made me fit in, and it was a large part of who I was, this wise guy. And I if I'm committed in this intention to not cause harm, then I have to be willing to let go of that sarcasm, that snarkasm, that snarky, sarcastic way of speaking. And it still comes up. So I ask your forgiveness in advance for anything I may say that's a wise ass. But it's like, okay, if I'm committed to this, then can I put this in place? And also I've had to use it to say what needs to be said, because there's also omission, not speaking what needs to be said by not saying anything. So there's wise speech, and then there's wise action, which is basically not taking a life, but also not causing harm. There's a couplet in the Dhammapada that says, avoid what is unskillful, do what is good, and purify the mind. We avoid causing harm, and we don't just avoid causing harm, but we cultivate kindness. We do good. We end suffering where we see it. We cultivate compassion. Really important. And also inside wise action is, don't take what's not freely offered. Again, you already recognize these from the precepts. It's not just stuff. Don't steal, but taking someone's time, taking ideas, being deceitful. All of that can cause so much harm to it's not just to others, but we're harming ourselves. And wise speech, watch how you talk to yourself internally too. If you have a narrative that's calling you all kinds of names, those voices that got installed somewhere along the line that we don't even question anymore. So it's not just causing harm to others, it's causing harm to ourselves. So not taking what's not freely offered, don't just not do that, but cultivate generosity, which is an antidote to greed. And again, not just financial necessarily or with stuff, but with time. I'm flying to Utah tomorrow, and I'm flying to Salt Lake for some work, and my colleague is driving down from Park City to pick me up, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so generous, because I think it's like 45 minutes or an hour drive. And I'm like, that is such a generous action. And so those are acts of generosity that we give each other. Listening to someone who's having a hard time, offering your ear for 10 minutes, offering a kind word, seeing somebody, acknowledging their existence. This is kindness. This is generosity. And then we abstain from sexual misconduct, which the Buddha it says is relations with a partner that is not a wise choice of a partner, and refrain from relations that are hurtful, which can, especially in this realm, we can hurt each other so easily. So to be mindful about our intimate relationships. Is this an appropriate partner? Is this a wise thing that I'm doing? And then the last piece is livelihood. How do you make your living? The Buddha said also around that, one should acquire your living by legal means, not illegally, peacefully, without coercion or violence, honestly, not by trickery or deceit, and in ways which do not entail harm and suffering for others or for yourself. So making a wise living can be tricky in this multi-global, national, international world that we live in, and especially in the economy that we live in. Sometimes we just need to put food on the table and a roof over our heads, because it's really challenging for so many folks right now. And what we do is we do the best we can. I've talked to a number of people who talk about, I don't think the job I'm doing is very wise or skillful, or in an industry that I don't like, weapons manufacturing or something. But they're not in a place to quit. And it's like, well, then don't, because you can't give that up. But we set an intention as best we can to move in a direction away from that kind of livelihood into another one, if it's possible. this is the beauty of the practice. What's our intention? Recognizing that perhaps we have to do this today, but hopefully tomorrow I can move away from causing harm. Because if we quit and then we can't take care of ourselves or our families, it does no one any good. So, and then the last section of the Eightfold Path is samadhi, or concentration, which includes wise effort, mindfulness, and concentration. And effort is the effort it takes to practice mindfulness. We want to be mindful, but we want to be mindful with wisdom and discernment. So effort is we recognize when our mind is caught up in thinking that's not skillful or helpful, or is thinking that's entangled in greed, hatred, or delusion. When we spend our time, we know Joseph Goldstein, I talked about this in an interview I read with him, and he said, we can be mindful and it can be unskillful and unwise and cause harm. It's like, I'm punching you in the face. I am thoroughly present in the moment. So I'm fully mindful and I'm causing harm. So being mindful doesn't mean we don't cause harm. There's a wisdom, because if we're grounded in non-harming, then we're mindful that what we're doing is causing harm, and that we are willing to let go and bring ourselves back to something more beneficial. And we cultivate the capacity to be present with more wholesome, more beneficial states of mind, where we don't daydream about harm or this or that, but we let go of that. We recognize when we're caught up in that greed or that conditioned thinking that doesn't serve us. The thoughts may come. I can have thoughts about wanting to punch somebody in the face, or recognizing when there's a lot of rage, because we don't deny our emotions. But I also don't plan on, fulfilling that. I recognize this is not helpful. This is not doing me or anyone any good. Can I let this go? So that's the effort, to let go of those stories. And then mindfulness, how do we do it? Satipatthana Sutta, stay connected to our breath and our body. And this helps us with the effort too. We begin to get a felt sense of balancing, because there's never an arrival and then you're there. It's because life and our circumstances and the world that we move through is shifting all the time. So we have to continually recalibrate. It's so easy to get caught up in one story or another story, but when we can recalibrate and come back, then we have the capacity to have equanimity. And Satipatthana starts with this grounding in the body and the breath. Where are we? Oh, that's the present moment. And then recognizing, second foundation, when things are unpleasant. Oh, that's unpleasant. That makes me want to scream or punch somebody out or flip them off, or whatever it is I want to do. I'm not going to do that. Or that's pleasant. Ooh, I want more. More is better. And so recognizing how there's a tendency to move in a particular direction based on whether things are pleasant or unpleasant. And can we be with those without needing to react? Because when we can pause, we can then perhaps respond wisely. And then the third foundation is recognizing those moods, those emotions that show up without shame or judgment. We're often taught that we're not supposed to feel a particular emotion, like anger is bad, grief should only last 3 days, jealousy, you can't have jealousy, joy, you can't be joyful today because there's so much horror and suffering in the world. That is to deny the reality of what your experience is. So recognizing those moods, recognizing those emotions, saying hi, have a seat, relax, greeting them with kindness, with compassion, for perhaps the first time. And then the fourth foundation is we understand the patterns and the habits of the mind. Oh, that story, when I feel fear, the story about running away always comes up. Oh, I recognize that habit of mind. I recognize that pattern, that old thinking, that old idea that still has its mitts in me. But now with wisdom and clarity, I recognize I don't have to act on it. I can just say hi. We make space for whatever is here. And we recognize what takes us away from liberation and what takes us towards liberation. All the practices in the Eightfold Path are nudging us towards freedom. And then concentration, the last factor, the eighth factor, is this steadiness that we have, this equanimity, this relaxed capacity to be fully present. And sometimes I bet we've all had a taste of it. I know I've had a taste of it. You've had a taste of it, where you're just present. Perhaps there's something happening that you're watching. Perhaps oftentimes it's something in nature, like a sunrise or a sunset, listening to bird song, looking at flowers, where you're just resting without it grasping, without it clinging, without it pushing, just being. That's the concentration. So practice recognizing that when it's present. Nurture it. I've had those moments where I'm like, wow, okay, this is great. I don't know how long it's going to last, but I'm just going to be here. And then often some thought shows up and I'm off to the races. But so this is the Eightfold Path. It's so chock full of wisdom and how to be in the world. It's a foundation it's a grounding in a groundless world, a world that has no place to land. We're always moving, we're always in transition. There's always stuff happening. So how do we find a way to navigate that without causing harm to ourselves or others, and recognizing that we're all in community with each other? We're all experiencing the human condition. So how can we greet the world with kindness? And all the rest of the suttas and all the rest of the teachings kind of expound on all of these different qualities, all of these different aspects. The Buddha taught many, many different people in many, many different ways, but it was all pointing in this direction. Walking away from suffering, walking towards liberation, the cessation of suffering, nibbana. And so I invite you to find where you are. Like I mentioned, I keep going back to intention and wise speech. Those are just so foundational to me because they speak to my challenges and my history and my biases and my struggles with attachment and aversion because of my conditioning and my experience. And other people may have different aspects that are troublesome, that are helpful for them. And so this book is really good. And then Gregory Kramer, Kramer, wrote a book called A Whole Life Path, and whole, WHOLE, A Whole Life Path, which is also about the Eightfold Path. And it's really geared to householders. How do we do it as people living in the world today? The Buddha talked a lot to monastics, so there was a little bit different quality, but none of us, I don't think, are in this group are monastics, so we have a little bit different experience that we're dealing with on a regular basis. So that, my friends, is my speedy teacher version of the Eightfold Path, and I hope that it's been helpful and of some benefit. And I'm happy to, hear any questions or comments or thoughts. Well, thank you again, my friends. And Marisol let us know everything that's going on, and I know you know it. And I'll be in person in Palm Springs on the 17th of August. If you want to sit for a few hours, I always love sitting a half day and is there anything else? I think we are the how to support ICD is also in the chat. You can support us financially with a donation when you come to class or become a monthly supporter, which is very helpful. And yeah, I think that might be it. That's it. Well, thank you everyone for being here. As I said, I just love sitting with you all and look forward to seeing those of you in a couple of weeks. And so remember that we don't just sit for our own benefit, but we sit for the benefit of all beings. May all beings be happy. May all beings be free. Thanks, y'all. Much love.